We are really happy to welcome back our speaker today, Reverend Maureen Shelton. She's Director of Education and Training at Emory Spiritual Health and of the Division of Compassion-Centered Spiritual Health. And the title of her talk today is The Third Way of Compassion, a way to explore the cultivation of sustainable empathy. Welcome, Maureen.
Good morning. Good morning. It's so wonderful to be back. And Bill, thank you so much always for your beautiful music and for y'all singing. It's such a joy to be here in community with you today. We're going to explore this third way of compassion as a way to explore having more sustainable empathy. I'm going to explore some mindsets which may be supportive of caring for ourselves while we care for others. And so, as we're beginning this exploration, are you all up for singing some more?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is a song that I wrote with a friend, Tim Harrison, who works with the Compassion Program. And it's a simple song, and I'm going to just do a little call and response to teach it, and we'll try it out together. So it starts off, may I see what is mine to do. May I see what is mine to do. This precious day. This precious day. Let's sing that line. May I see what is mine to do. This precious day. And there's only one more line. This is the second line. We'll do that in two parts. May each step I take, may each step I take, be mindful of our preciousness. Be mindful of our preciousness. May I see what is mine to do. This precious day. May I see what is mine to do. This precious day. May each step I take be mindful of our preciousness. May each step I take be mindful of our preciousness. Thank you for learning that and singing that together. So we'll have a chance to sing that song again at the end. So sometimes I see singing as a practice, as a way to cultivate a sense of a way to feel what we're saying. So I appreciate us just contemplating those words, which are related to what I'm going to be exploring today, this third way of compassion. So I wanted to share a little bit of this conceptual piece, and then share a story from someone in our world today that's inspiring, and then talk a little bit more about these different mindsets. So in this course of cognitively based compassion training, I want to bring forward some of these things to explore. We look at these different types of empathy. Now, there's been a lot of research, and some collections, some books, some authors can cite over 70 different types of empathy, but we're just going to talk about 3. So what we are trying to do is, by exploring these different types of empathies, make more visible some of our habits that may unintentionally not be supportive of more sustainable empathy, and see what we can do to attune to mindsets that might be more supportive. So one type of empathy is this more effective empathy. And all these empathies are good, it's just seeing what combination you have in it. Effective empathy is where we take on the feelings of others as if they're our own. Now, this is a needed part of compassion. We want to be able to take on others' feelings and feel like it's our own. But if we stop there, that can be a challenge. Because what can happen is we can lose our sense of balance, right? That we have resources within us. We can become maybe more enmeshed in that other person's story, and not really, and perhaps in this kind of excessive narrowness can kind of lose our sense of what we can do. And there's another type of empathy called cognitive empathy. And that's more the capacity to take on the perspective of somebody else, which is also needed. But if we only have that, if we only stop with that, sometimes we can maybe use that as information to try to get what we want, right? We can take on a person's perspective and hear what they want. We might shape what we're saying for them to only, support what we want. And that's the extreme. But the role of cognitive empathy is important. But if we have effective empathy and cognitive empathy, that's not really enough for compassion in this theory. The third type of empathy is empathic concern. And this is the type of empathy where we care about what's happening. We care about it, and that's in that care, we're cultivating this awareness that we want to see what we can do. So all 3 of those empathy are helpful, but what we really want to focus on today is this empathic concern. As there's a model that we have, just to summarize, if you can imagine this, that when we are in the face of suffering, we might go to the extreme of becoming enmeshed in the other person's suffering. The other side of that, when we are encountering with suffering, is that we can have this extreme of turning away from the suffering. What we're talking about here with this empathic concern is this third way of compassion that we often illustrate with the sun to talk about this warm-heartedness, this caring about it. Because this leads towards motivation to want to keep seeing what we can do, rather than these unintentional habits of becoming this enmeshed or turning away. So this is something we're going to explore a little bit. Does that make sense? Yeah. So some of the mindsets that support this third way, this is kind of pooling from many different insights, but we're just going to talk about 3. So one of the ways to help cultivate this warm-heartedness, this third way, this caring about, it takes some work within ourselves. The work within ourselves, as you all know, is so important to kind of look at our habits that we've learned very honestly from families, from culture, from our own experience, that might have led us to go to more of these narrow views rather than seeing a broader perspective. That when we are in the midst of suffering, we might get very narrow in our focus, which can keep us from seeing how we can care for ourselves while we're caring for others. So one of the habits to cultivate is this sense of acknowledging and allowing whatever we are experiencing in our own inner life without judgment. Just, what am I feeling? What's going on with me? And to let myself feel those things with gentleness. And to realize that I'm ultimately more than any one moment. And through that acknowledging and allowing can help me pause and kind of feel what I'm feeling so that I can see what needs tending and resourcing. Another mindset that can be supportive is to attune to our common humanity. So often, and I think I just always get a sense of how much you've cultivated this in this community every time I come. To really get this felt sense, to not just know it, but to cultivate this feeling sense that others like us want to have well-being and to avoid distress. So that when we are getting activated by something, and when we're exposed to suffering, sometimes we can go to a more narrow view and think, I'm the one, who is the person who is seeing this, there's nobody else who's seeing this, I'm by myself. That when I cultivate this sense of common humanity, I can see that others have the same desire for well-being and to avoid distress. And how does that help me cultivate warm-heartedness? As I get to know my own complexity, as I acknowledge and allow my inner world with less judgment and more acceptance, more sense of agency, then perhaps I can see I'm complex because I don't always, do what supports my well-being. I'm not always acting in a way that supports that. And as I see others and cultivate this sense of common humanity, that others like me want to have well-being and avoid distress, but they also might have some complexity in the way they're doing that, it might give me a sense of connection to them. Common humanity. We're all in this together, trying to figure it out. And we all have differences, which are so important to be able to attune to and learn from. But sometimes, because of habits, part of our complexity is we get very narrow in our view. And we start to see others as us versus them, right? And that can take away from this common humanity. And it doesn't mean that we won't challenge somebody, but when we challenge out of this sense of connection, of warm-heartedness, how does that help facilitate dialogue? How does that help people feel seen in the midst of our differences so that change might happen more? And then there's this cultivated sense of our interdependence. That along with the sense of common humanity, we can cultivate this awareness that we receive gifts all the time in our daily life. That we are leaning into and relying on others contributing to us getting what we need in our daily life. Like if we think about the coffee that we got this morning, or those of us who were able to partake of it this morning, just imagining that, we can think about how many people have helped us get that coffee this morning. The people who delivered it, the people who created it in the packaging so we could buy it in the store, the people who harvested it, the companies, the farmers, all. You can just think about many different people who contributed to that one item. So if we have that mindset, how does that shift how we relate to others? More out of a sense of gratitude, perhaps, that we're relying on each other. So as we try to attune to this third way of compassion, we can be more aware of our acknowledging and allowing whatever's happening within us, attuning to our common humanity, and attuning to our interdependence. These are three suggested ways to cultivate this sense of warmth. Now there's a wonderful example of this, and I know many of you are very familiar with her, Malala Yousafzai. And how many people are aware of Malala? Yes. So a Pakistani activist, a youngest Nobel laureate, who is a continual advocate for the rights of girls and women, and all of us as humans. And there was a TED Talk that I would refer you to, if you haven't got to hear it, called What I Got Wrong About Changing the World. And as you hear this story, I invite you to think about how she is maybe bringing forward some of these three qualities of acknowledging and allowing our inner experience, this attuning to common humanity and interdependence. Malala says that when she was first attacked by the Taliban, she was really trying to bring forward this awareness that girls, the importance of girls getting education, the importance of having that wisdom source in the world to educate these girls. And because she spoke up, she was shot by the Taliban and thankfully survived and had to go through many different surgeries to go through her healing. And as a result of this incident that happened, she was able to have a platform. So she met with many world leaders and had many different platforms to talk about her advocacy and her story. So she said, I had the mindset that if I could just bring to the attention of the leaders what the problems were, that the problems would be solved. So she wanted to just keep making it visible, going to leaders. She had this sense of hope and optimism that by bringing the attention, that would bring relief. So a few years ago, she was having her 11th surgery to recover from her injury. And she was in the recovery room, and she picked up her phone, and she saw, this was in 2021, she saw on her phone that the Afghanistan had been taken control again by the Taliban. And they had promised that they would not restrict girls' education. But she called her friends in Afghanistan, and she saw and she heard that that was not the case, that after 6th grade, young girls could no longer have education, access to education. She also saw there was a law passed that it would be legal for men to beat their children and their wives. So this put her in a state of despair. She lost sight of her hope and optimism. But she noticed within her, as she was being with whatever she was feeling, she noticed within her that she could not turn away. That she cared so much about these girls that she could not give up hope. So she turned her attention back to the concern. And she said, but what can I do? And she heard her friends. She heard that there was underground schooling happening. And so she said, what can I do to support these underground schools in Afghanistan? She also heard that it would be supportive to fund and to nurture an all-girls football team, soccer team, for Afghanistan. And so she did that. And then she realized that one of the most important elements this time around in this new season of her advocacy was to realize that unintentionally she might have been thinking that she was alone and it was all on her. And sometimes, not to say that this is what for her, but sometimes that kind of element, if we think that we are responsible for everything, when something goes wrong, we feel like it was all our fault, right? So there's this kind of narrowness. So we want to have a perspective of, if we can, in terms of this third way of compassion, is seeing that if we can cultivate this awareness that we are part of this interdependent web, we can maybe see that it's all of us that are involved in bringing a solution. So this became much more clear for her, and she started to work with artists to see what they could do to make visible different paths to this kind of justice. She created 2 films to make more visible the issue. And she also saw that there was all these different people working on different resolutions to make it more of an international law through the UN. And she said, well, let's make it international law against any kind of gender apartheid, where there's this kind of all girls can't do this. Let's make this part of the UN. So a new treaty to make this more visible and sustainable. And as she was cultivating these different practices with moral awareness that she was not alone, and that there are many different streams that she could tap into and gain from that energy. She said, I know that progress isn't guaranteed, but we can work together, and this can help us be more bold and more ambitious. The bigger the fight, the bigger the ambition. And she says this helps us create hope. So as you're hearing her story, she's kind of redefining resilience as an active, collaborative practice. How do you notice that she is living into some of this acknowledging and allowing, attuning to common humanity and interdependence? Does anybody have any thoughts about that? What did you hear in that story about that? Yes?
That she couldn't do a treaty on her own.
Yes, couldn't do a treaty on her own. So that kind of leaning into that interdependence. Yeah, great, thank you.
She didn't let anything stop her determination.
She didn't let anything stop her determination, that's right. And I think for me, I connect this, I'm not sure if this makes sense to you, but this kind of capacity to acknowledge and allow and be with her despair at first helped her then to ultimately see her motivation was, I can't turn away. But sometimes if we don't let ourselves feel that, we can become more and more stuck. So that capacity to let ourselves feel all the feelings and say, but what else is here? My motivation. Yeah, and perhaps by tapping into this broader view of this interdependence, she was able to see this virtuous cycle of compassion. Like I can pour it out and I can rest in what's actually happening, that's a movement towards progress, and let myself rest in that and take that in as then I keep going, rather than just keep going without pausing to again check in with ourselves. And let ourselves rest in what is going well. Anything else that you noticed from her story that connects to that kind of those mindsets attunement?
She had to acknowledge the smaller accomplishments.
She had to realize her smaller accomplishments?
Like instead of a school or public school, it was underground school.
Yeah.
It was still school.
It was not a public school, it was underground, it was still school. That's beautiful. And so the more we can do that for ourselves, perhaps that helps us have this more sustainable compassion, like resting as we go, and seeing that there's some different shifts in our way of perceiving that can support this more warm-hearted compassion, this caring about it sustainably. Does that make sense? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
From what you said, perhaps part of her despair and hopelessness was her taking it on that she had failed with her awareness.
Yes.
And then by getting into that feeling of despair, she realized that, or being drawn back to it, she could do more and from a different way by bringing in other people, which, like we said, helps take away that it would be her fault.
Yes, that's beautiful.
It wasn't her fault.
It wasn't her fault. Yes, and yeah, thank you for pointing that out, because that when we are in that kind of maybe more narrow view that if everything is up to us to fix, then everything's our fault, we are more likely to say that we failed, right? And this kind of virtuous cycle can help make it more visible to see that there are many different contributing factors, and that there is something we can do in the midst of this web of interdependence.
And also she realized, I'm thinking that when she was in that despair, she didn't really know how to turn away from it.
Yes.
There was no option. I don't know how to not care.
Yes, beautiful. Yeah, so by feeling her feelings, she also became aware of her feeling of I can't turn away. Yeah, beautiful. So these words of the song that we're going to return to now, and again, as I mentioned earlier, just invite you to think about the song as a practice. Because the words of the song in some ways mirror what we're talking about, the sense of acknowledging, allowing, the sense of attuning to common humanity, interdependence, and discernment. That this kind of warm-heartedness can help us have discernment about each step of the way that we take. So would you be open to singing again? And let's just take a moment to, if you'd like, to close your eyes as we're singing, just to kind of get perhaps a felt sense of where you might experience that. Maybe there's a word or a phrase that stands out to you, or a feeling you have in your body as you're singing it. So let's just practice that again. May I see what is mine to do this precious day. May I see what is mine to do this precious day. May each step I take be mindful of our preciousness. May each step I take be mindful of our preciousness. So I just invite you, if it's helpful to sing that song, or just to remember maybe a sense of warm-heartedness as you were singing that. Would anybody like to share their experience of singing that song? Any memories? Well, thank you for just singing it together, because I don't know if you're familiar with Cole Arthur Riley. She's an incredible young woman who's written this book called Black Liturgies, Prayers, Poems, and Meditations for Staying Human. And she says, our calling demands that we honor its fluidity. If there's anything unchanging in it, it is that we are called to whatever makes us more human. And I would just add that living into how we can cultivate more sustainable compassion helps us perhaps feel that sense of humanity more in our daily life. Thank you so much.